Hello everybody, today we're going to learn about Unity's animation system. In this video, we're going to go over how to turn sprite sheets into animations and then control which animations play using an Animator Controller. I'm going to start by creating a new 2D project and calling it Sprite Sheet Animation. Now that Unity is open, I'm going to create a basic character controller so that we can test out our animations. I'm going to start by creating a ground sprite so that our player has something to stand on. And I'm just going to resize it until it fits the width of the screen. Now I'm going to add our player object by creating a new sprite and also giving it the square sprite. I'm going to add the rigid body component and set its Z rotation to be frozen. I'm also going to add a box collider and one to the ground as well. Now if we start our game, you'll notice that our player falls on the ground and then stops. So now we need to be able to move our player. I'm going to create a very basic character controller so that we can move them, and then we'll add the animations. I'm also going to rename my player so that it's not confusing. I've created this very basic movement script for the purposes of displaying how our Animator Controller works. First, it gets a reference to our rigid body component attached to our game object, and then it sets the velocity based on our horizontal input, which is mapped to the left and right arrows, and multiplies it by a speed variable. So when I start the game, I can use the arrow keys to move left and right. Now I'm going to import the sprite sheet that we'll be using for the animations for our player. The download link will be in the description below, so if you want to use the sprite sheet that I'll be using, you can download it and import it into your project. Now that I've imported my player animation sprite sheet, you'll see it in the asset list in the bottom left. This may be on the bottom of your screen based on your Unity layout, but it should still be fairly easy to find. On the right side, you will see the import settings. Because this is a sprite sheet, we want to change sprite mode from single to multiple, and pixels per unit should be how big each tile is. In my game, it's 16 by 16. Where it says filter mode, you want to change it from bilinear to point no filter. This will make it so pixels don't stretch out or become blurry when you resize them. Under compression, I'm going to change it from normal quality to none to make sure that my colors are the same as when I exported them. After doing all this, I will hit apply, and you may have noticed the colors change a little bit. Now we can open the player in the Sprite Editor. So in the import settings, click the Sprite Editor button, and we will have our sprite sheet. So right now, there are no separate sprites, so I'm going to slice it by using the slice button. You can do automatic, grid by cell size, or grid by cell count. I'm going to use grid by cell size and change it to be 16 and 16. And by clicking slice, we'll get a very nicely sliced animation. I am now going to hit apply, and you will notice something. Now you will notice that in your asset list, an arrow has appeared next to your sprite sheet. By clicking on it, you can see each individual sprite. On the bottom right corner, you will see the sprite and be able to see how it looks in its animations by clicking on each one. I'm going to reopen my scene now, and we're going to turn these into animations. To do so, click on one sprite and shift-click to select all the sprites from a single animation. These four are part of the idle animation, and now that they are selected, I'm going to drag it into the hierarchy view. A window like this will pop up asking where you want to store your animation. it's a good habit to create a folder for your animations to keep them separate from your other file types. So I'll create a folder called Animations. I'm going to title this animation player_idle. And you'll see that our player is here now. It automatically has a component called Animator. We'll get to what that does later. But for now, I don't need the idle animation, so I'm going to delete it. It will still be in our asset list though. Now I'm going to select the last 4 frames that are part of the walk animation, and I'm going to import those. Going back into my animations folder, I will call this one player_walk. Again, I do not need the animation yet, so I will delete this object. You'll see in our project view that we now have some things under animations. These are animator controllers, and these are animations. Animations are what you'd Animator controllers are what tells Unity when to play what animations. Animations can play after a certain amount of time or when a condition is met. But right now we do not need these animation controllers. So I'm going to hit delete on both of them and just keep the ones that say player idle and player walk. At the top right, you will see a setting called loop time. If this is checked, the animation will loop, and since both of these animations should loop, I will keep both of them checked. Now it is time to finally add our animations to our player. First, I'm going to click on our player. I'm going to scroll down to click Add Component and add an Animator Component. I'm going to create a new Animator Controller. So under Animations, I'm going to right-click, click Create, and create a new Animator Controller. I will call this one Player. Now with my player selected, in the inspector view, if I scroll down, I can change our controller to our newly created Player Animator Controller. Now, I'm going to open our Animator Controller so you can see what it looks like. You'll notice off the bat that there are a few things. These are where our animations go. In our Animations folder, try dragging an animation into here and letting go. And you will see that the animation called Entry now has a red arrow pointing to your animation. This will become the default animation that will play as soon as the object gets loaded. Let's drag in our walk animation too. Now, to go from our idle to our walking animation, we need to create a transition. The easiest way to create a transition from state to state is by using the AnyState state. This state will allow you to transition between different animation clips at any time between any states. By right-clicking any state, click Make Transition and create one to each of our new states. You will see that it's added 2 transitions. Now we need to tell the Animator Controller when to switch to each state. To do that, we will use parameters. On the top left, make sure you have parameters selected and click the plus button and add a new float. This one will be called Velocity X. It will represent the absolute value of our player's velocity. We're going to want the walking animation to play whenever velocity x is greater than 0.1. And we want the idle animation to play whenever it's less than 0.1. So click on the other arrow and click plus, and then say less than 0.1. Now our animation will transition to idle if our velocity x is less than 0.1, and walking if it's greater than 0.1. And remember, this represents the absolute value, so it does not matter what direction your player is going in. In any state, an animation can transition into itself and interrupt itself. To stop this, click the Can Transition To button and make sure it's off on both transitions. Now that we have our Animator Controller set up, let's add the code to make it work. Let's go back into our movement script and let's add a new reference to our Animator component. Type in private animator anim, and in your wake or start function, type in anim equals getComponent animator. Now our animator variable is a reference to our player's animator component. The final thing we need to do is set our velocity x variable by using the script. So, going back to the script, under our velocity line, type in anim.setFloat, the name of the float, which is velocity x, and then what value you'd like to set it to. In this case, we want to get rb2d.velocity.x, and we want to get the absolute value. So you want to do mathf.abs. By using setFloat, setInt, setTrigger, or setBool, you can change the animator component's parameters using a script like this. If we go back into Unity, we can see how this behaves in-game. If we hit the play button, you will see that it by default plays our idle animation, which right now looks a little fast. We'll fix that later. But click on your player, and then open your animator, and you'll see that it's looping the animation. Great. Now, and if we walk, you'll see that the velocity x value changes based on the velocity of our player. This is taken from our rigid body 2D component, and you'll see that it matches the velocity here. You will also now notice that our player comes up in a preview panel. We can now see exactly what our animations look like on our player and how they transition between different ones. This is the timeline, and this represents how our player goes from our idle to our walking animation. You will see the blue highlighted section here is when our walking animation starts. So right now it's playing the idle, and as soon as it goes into the walking animation, he will begin moving his legs. This is especially helpful on rigged models and player sprites. You'll notice a couple things are wrong with our animation. For one, it is playing way too fast. For two, our player switches into an idle animation before turning around. And three, our player does not look like they are turning around. They are still facing right. We're going to start by fixing the one where he turns around. So go back into your script and create a new reference to our sprite renderer component by typing in private sprite renderer sprite render. And then again, in our wake or start function, we're going to type in sprite render equals getComponent sprite renderer. We're going to change whether our sprite faces left or right by using an if statement. So we're going to type in if rb2d.velocity.x is greater than 0f. In this case, it'll make our player face right. So we want to type in sprite render.flipx equals false because they are already facing right. And then else if rb2d.velocity.x is less than 0f, then we want sprite render.flipx to be equal to true. Let's try it out in our game now and see how that works. You'll see our player turns around now. Great. Now let's fix the animation speed. Going to our animator and clicking on our animation, we can change the speed. I'm going to change the speed of the idle animation to something around 0.25. I think a good idea for the walking animation would be 0.5. So hitting the play button, you will see that these changes automatically happen. And now, the walking animation is slower, and the idle animation is slower. That leaves one thing to fix, which is the idle animation coming every time we turn around. To make it so that our player does not display the idle animation while turning around, we need to change a value in the animator. So on your animator component, in the transitions to both the idle and walk animation, change transition duration to be 0. This controls how long it takes to go between animations and how much it smooths while it's going between animations. This does not affect a lot in 2D art, but in rigged models and sprites, it does make a difference. Now you'll notice when we play our game, it goes from the walking animation to the idle animation immediately and no longer plays the other animation while turning around. I hope you enjoyed this short video on how to create animator components and animation clips in Unity. Give it a thumbs up if you'd like to see more tutorial videos, and a comment down below on what you want me to make a tutorial of next. Have a great day.